When I start to think deeply about it, I start to get emotional because everything that happened in my life as a Christian was all integrated in that birth of that church and that fellowship. The very first Friday night, the five of us sat around a dining room table, and I didn't leave till 39 years later.
I am so grateful that John spent the time to study the Word and feed me, just simply feed me. Simply teaching the Word simply to me and my family. My children love the Lord. The people in this church have been so blessed.
What else I can tell you that there is love here in this church and good pastors and good people. I love it. I love it. So I hope everybody feels the same way that I do, because this is real. This is real.
I can't believe that it's been 50 years of ministry, actually about 51, depending on where we start. But I was raised in a Christian home. At age 8, accepted Christ, but never walked with the Lord, never read the Bible, and not sure whether or not I was really born again or not, but I loved Jesus, but got in the wrong crowd in high school, fell away from the Lord, and then my senior year in high school at Pacific High School, 1971, right here in San Bernardino, my sister left a living Bible in my bedroom. It was actually Living Letters to the Ephesians by Kenneth Taylor. And I began to read it, and it was like God just spoke to my heart and convicted me of my sin. My parents took a trip to Ventura, and I went with them and took a long walk down the beach, sat on the beach that day, and I'll never forget just where I was, the beautiful day on the beach, and I just poured out my heart to God, repented, turned to God, and experienced just a forgiveness and a cleansing and a weight lift off my shoulders. And a young man, only really 18 years old, just out of high school. And then I got a job at Campus Crusade, worked there for a few months, saved up enough money to do my life ambition, was to go to Hawaii and surf for a few months. Lived in a tent for a few months, surfed over there, but came back to California that spring, 72. And I met an old friend of mine, his name was Pierce Flynn, and he said, "Hey, I'm a Christian, let's get together at my parents' house, let's have a Bible study or fellowship." So we went to the Flynn house and started a Bible study there. And week by week, it just continued to grow till we had to move out of there. And then Pierce and I got the garden house together, rented it together. And there at the garden house, God began to bless, and the fellowship just began to grow. And I eventually began to teach the Word of God from that humble beginnings, actually is today what is Calvary Chapel, San Bernardino. So after meeting in the garden house for, I don't know, a couple of years or so, and we had houses packed out, we found out that the Presbyterian Church on D Street in San Bernardino had a chapel that would hold like 150 people. And we had a stage and sound system and childcare, and we began to grow. We grew probably to almost 200 people there at that chapel. And then from there we moved to starting Sundays at the YMCA. I believe it was about 1977 when we started the Sunday service at the YMCA, which was actually YWCA, which was not my idea or my vision. My dad was the one that said, "Hey, we could start Sunday services and meet at the YMCA," so that is how that got started.
So it was my wife who came to a Sunday night Bible study at the YMCA when John Miller had just started the church. It was going on for a few years, but it was just starting to grow. So we came to church on that Sunday morning in 1979, and there was John. He was there just teaching the Word. He had a big beard, and he was just teaching verse by verse through the Bible. We came back that Sunday night, and there were about maybe 30 people sitting in a circle, and John had his Bible open. He was teaching from the Old Testament, and I was hooked from that moment because he taught the Bible in a way that it was authoritative, that every word that he spoke, that I read from the scriptures as I followed his speech and the Word of God, this was the Bible. This is how a Christian is supposed to learn and grow. And from that moment in time, we knew. I mean, I looked at Esther, she looked at me, and from that point, we knew this was our church.
I was getting a model from Pastor Chuck just to teach the Bible verse by verse. And what a blessing that was. So it was happening at the same time that Skip Heitzig and I, being good friends, we got together a lot and talked about preaching and what is good preaching. And so I just began to open the Bible and started chapter 1, verse 1 and teach the Bible verse by verse. And then I stumbled onto the B series commentaries. And the first B book I ever read by Warren Wiersbe was Be Right, the book of Romans. And I was teaching Romans on Sunday morning at the YMCA. And I began to see how he packaged the text and put it together and began to use that as a guideline for how to preach expository sermons. So for many, many years, it's just been a passion of mine. I know Pastor Lee does the same thing. And I think that when you're preaching expositorily the Bible, that you're saying what God says.
The YMCA was just too small, so they were looking for a place. Well, this building came up. It was a Red Barn furniture store, and the furniture store was freshly built. It was newly constructed, and then from 83 to 84, a lot of us young 20-something-year-olds started to do this remodel of this furniture store. And we worked for a year to try to get in there, but the church didn't really have any money. At that time, we had Pastor John and his assistant, Gene Pensiero, and then there was Ed Hill, the administrator, and he ran the bookstore.
It was quite a process. I remember one experience when I was sitting on a stack of drywall in what is now the sanctuary there at the barn with Ed Hill, and we were looking at the finances. We had $150, I think, in the bank, and we still needed thousands of dollars to get drywall to be able to finish off the barn. We prayed, said, Lord, it's your church. When you guide, you provide. We ask that you'll just provide the needed funds and the drywall and the laborers to get this done. God answered prayer. Seeing how Greg did the crusades, the Harvest Crusades that started early, I don't know if they were called Harvest Crusade yet or not, but they'd come to the Swing Auditorium in San Bernardino. We were part of that. Actually booked the Paris Hill Bowl up on Highland Avenue in San Bernardino to do what we call Maranatha Summer Concerts. We have a Mustard Seed Faith, and we'd have The Way, and we'd have Sweet Comfort Band, and just all the different Maranatha musicians. And we'd get a large crowd, and we would preach the gospel, and so many people come to Christ. I've met people years down the road that said they accepted Christ at one of the Maranatha Summer Concerts at Paris Hill Bowl.
So we had all these concerts. I had the privilege of serving as a counselor and after service counselor to people. And there were hundreds of people that were coming to Christ through that ministry and filling the Red Barn and other churches in the area. It was a fantastic time.
For about 10, 11 years, I, with other people from our church there at Calvary San Bernardino, traveled to West Australia, also the East Coast, Sydney area, and then we did ministry mainly, although in the West, around Perth and south of there. We've done outreaches, conferences, traveled there with Gary Nelson and other pastors. We had missionaries go to the Philippines. We had missionaries in Mexico. We had missionaries go off to Russia. Did ministry in Germany with Nick Long, went to Austria, Serbia, Croatia, preached in Scotland, England, just myriad of other places where God used the little Red Barn to touch the world in a way that we never thought was possible. A couple of amazing highlights of the years I spent pastoring there in San Bernardino was I had traveled to the Cove, the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove, with a couple other pastors, and we were going there to hear Warren Wiersbe preach and teach. And the very first evening there, we got to meet him in the lounge and get to know him. And because of that contact, we actually asked if he would come and do a pastor's conference at Calvary Chapel, San Bernardino. So we had 3 days at the barn with Warren Worsby, and that was an amazing time as Worsby taught, and we sat and we learned and we grew. And what a blessing that was. We also had an evening with John Walvard, who at that time had been retired from Dallas Seminary, but he came and preached on the millennium. And what an amazing experience that was. We had Hal Lindsey come and preach. We had John MacArthur a couple different times who actually visited here at the barn and taught for us, and what a blessing that was.
It was in 2011 that I could tell John was a little restless, and that God was stirring John in different ways.
I began to feel a stirring in my heart that God maybe wanted to call me to a new venture of faith or a new ministry.
And but his focus, teaching the Word, never altering.
We were praying, seeking the Lord, and then in 2012, God opened the doors for me to come to Revival Christian Fellowship in Menifee.
I remember he called me up, and it was a Monday. I thought, that's weird. He must be at the beach. And he called me and he said, hey, I want to meet you at Kay's restaurant. And I remember seeing him sitting way back in the corner. And I walked in and I thought, oh no. And I said, John, what did you do? I actually remember saying, what did you do? Because I thought, this is so unusual for John. And he said, sit down, and I said, John, what's going on? I've decided to answer God's call and go to revival.
And as difficult as that decision was, I was absolutely confident that it was God's plan, God's purpose, that God had been preparing me for the new step of faith and the new church he was calling me to, and that God was preparing Pastor Lee.
And so I said, well, the Lord's really going to have to do a work in my heart, John, I'm going to need your help. And he committed to me at that point in time that he would help me. And so he went on to revival. I remember his last Sunday when he had the elders come up and lay hands on Esther and I, and he again announced to the church he was leaving, but I was going to take over the church, and this was his last Sunday, and so he had me come up and all the elders come up, and there was this really unique prayer time. I sensed the Lord in that meeting. I remember shedding tears, partly because John had been my pastor, and still is my pastor, by the way. John is my pastor. But what a blessing to have the Word of God as the focal point of this ministry, and it continues here at the Red Barn, just as it does there in Revival today.
I look into the future and I just see nothing but great things. God is doing a great work. He always has done a great work here at Calvary Chapel Red Barn. I mean, for goodness sakes, we've got 50 years of history of the great things that God has done.
I just look forward to, what the Lord is going to do, and I thank Him for what He has already done in my life and the lives of many.
We're also excited for what's to come and seeing so many new families, new faces, and our hallway packed full of kids.
We're thankful for the blessing that this church has been not only to us, but also to the community.
And I just pray that Calvary Chapel Red Barn will just continue on and be that light to the community, that the strangers, those seeking, can come and hear the good news, the truth.
It's a church where people care for each other. And we can call anytime, and we can come to the office anytime, and they serve us and help us, and the fellowship is amazing between here, all the people here in this church. As I said, I've been here 22 years, and it's amazing the love of God that you can see here in the church.
So the garden house on Garden Drive there was up against a dead-end street, and just north of the house was Paris Hill. And it used to be a great spot for us to go from the garden house up Paris Hill. And from there you can look over the entire city of San Bernardino. And Skip and I and some other brothers from the fellowship, Jimmy Bruce and We used to go up and sit up on that mountain and we would pray for God to use us for His glory. My looking back is basically that God sustained, God protected, God provided, God matured, God grew. Both me, the church, and the church that I'm at now, all in His perfect plan. So again, what an amazing God we serve. God provides pastor teachers for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, and so that we all might come together and be built up into our knowledge of God and be used by God for His glory.